You're watching Let the Quran Speak. And now we discuss the inner dimensions of fasting. Why has God put Muslims through this trial of fasting during the long and hot summer days? Surely there's something more to it than hunger and thirst. What are the inner dimensions of fasting, and how can Muslims get the most out of this exercise? With me is Brother Shabir. Brother Shabir, as I mentioned earlier, surely there's something more to our fasting than just being hungry and thirsty. What is the implication, or what is the significance of fasting for Muslims?
Yes, the Quran in Surah 2, verse 183 says that God has prescribed this institution of fasting for you, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may
achieve
take
righteousness,
care, or it's difficult to translate, but we can explain it by saying that that you achieve a state of piety, a sort of state of awareness, a state of taking precautions in things, being aware and taking care and preserving yourself. Well, how does the fasting do this? Well, first of all, in terms of, if we interpret the term as being a sort of consciousness of God, that fasting helps you develop the consciousness of God, well, then this speaks to the inner dimension of fasting, in that there is a spiritual side to this whole thing. Fasting does involve hunger and thirst, but at the same time, the spiritual self is becoming closer and closer to God. You see,
how does one develop that consciousness of God through fasting?
Well, this is precisely what I was thinking to explain. You see, if we are having this call to eat or drink, as we all do, and we say no, then why are we saying no? It's because of our special relationship with God during the time of fasting. It's because we're fasting for the sake of God. So when we when we say no to the physical desires and yes to God, and we do this continuously, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, the entire month of Ramadan, well, then this develops this conscious habit in us that we're always looking to please God. And this can have its overall impact in shaping the soul of the human individual.
Now, some people talk about fasting being freedom from the chains of the nafs. Maybe you can describe what that means.
Well, there is an interesting statement related to the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he said that in the month of Ramadan, the shayateen, or the devils, are chained. And people have pondered as to what that means, whether, you know, the satans of the universe have been suddenly rounded up and put into chains. And it doesn't seem like that is the right interpretation, because we know that satanic activity continues during the month of Ramadan as it does continue in other months. But what it seems to refer to is that there is an inner devil in each person, symbolically speaking, in that there is what we refer to as the nafsul ammara, the degenerate soul in some human individuals. Well, we all have a certain degree of that. And what fasting does is fasting actually chains that degenerate soul from coming to the fore and making itself manifest through our actions. So we, by fasting, actually chain up our own inner devils, so that inclination towards evil that we find in ourselves becomes now circumscribed during the month of Ramadan, especially while we're fasting.
Do we suddenly develop greater willpower or discipline? What is it?
To me, this is one of the greater benefits of fasting, in that I spoke about the special relationship with God that comes from refusing to eat or drink during the daylight hours. At the same time, it develops a strong willpower, in that people sometimes feel themselves to be slaves to their desires. People are addicted to alcohol, to tobacco, to drugs, to gambling, to a wide array of activities and substances.
Even to food sometimes.
Yes.
People overeat excessively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They become obese, excessively so. This leads to many medical problems, and they still cannot help themselves. They cannot stop. Fasting teaches us to stop and to be in control of all of these desires. So when the believer says, no, I won't eat or drink, and there's a strong call from within, our systems are made such to call for the needs of the system. And we can become slaves to the system by always providing the needs of that system. But during this month, we constrain it a little bit by saying, no, I won't respond until the sunset hour. that's when I'll have something to eat or drink. And when we ignore the call of our bodies and our desires for this length of time, 1 day, 2 days, several days, the whole month, we do that for one Ramadan, then the next Ramadan, then eventually that gives us a real sense that we are in control of our desires, and that we cannot be governed by these things. There are higher purposes of the human existence, and we need to achieve those higher purposes. The intellect, the human thought, which is the one thing that distinguishes us from the animal world, that we have such a highly developed consciousness, that is given more room to be the guiding forces in our lives during this sacred month.
Does fasting affect the way we behave, the way we go about our lives?
Yes, it definitely should, and it does. In a hadith, the Prophet, peace be upon him, says that if one does not give up false speech and acting according to falsehood, or acting in false ways, then God has no need for such a person to give up his food or drink. It's a very stark statement. It's saying, you don't really belong to the institution of fasting if you're not going to give up these things. Moreover, he is reported that he said that if a person picks a fight with you while you're fasting, you should just say, I'm fasting, and not respond with violence. And that you should neither use foul language or obscene speech while you're fasting. So these all show that the behavior of the fasting person should be affected by his or her fast. And in fact, people are affected by their fast. During the fasting period, Muslims generally become more humble, and they realize their own dependency on God, and also their interconnectedness with the rest of humankind.
What about worldly matters? Does fasting kind of separate you from the mundane aspects of worldly life?
Well, fasting is calling towards a greater level of spirituality. At the same time, we are human beings, we have human needs, and the religion of Islam is a very practical one, taking into consideration all aspects of life. So people during the month of Ramadan are still expected to go out their daily routines, whether they have classes to attend or business or work, family matters. All of these have to be given their due right and kept in balanced proportions.
Does fasting cause one to develop greater compassion towards other human beings?
Yes, I believe so. Often we are oblivious to the sufferings of the world because we live in situations of plenitude. We have something always in the fridge. We cannot imagine that there are people. I mean, we can if we think about it, but most of the time we don't think about it. We don't realize that there are people in other parts of the world who do not have a fridge and do not have anything to put in the fridge, even if they had a fridge. So while we are fasting, we get that sense of hunger. We experience real thirst. And this is when it comes to our consciousness that there are people in the world who are going through the same thing. At the end of the day, we thank God because we are ready now to break our fast. We feel the sense of accomplishment. We've done it. Here we are at the end of the day. And the food and drink are delicious, but more delicious is the thought that we have accomplished something and we have mastered and controlled our own destiny. But at the same time, we realize that we have something to eat here. There may be people in the world who do not have something to eat at this time.
We would be fasting by choice, but there are some individuals who fast by necessity.
Exactly. And this is where Muslims ought to become more charitable during the month of Ramadan, remembering the poor and hungry of the world.
Is there anything else you want to add about the inner dimensions of fasting before we end?
Well, just one thing, that while we are fasting and we are getting close to God and we're becoming closer to our fellow human beings as well, we need to cultivate a deeper attachment to God in our prayer and in our recitation of the Book of God. So while praying, we should feel that inner consciousness. While reciting the Book of God, we should feel closer to God.
Well said. Thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, we answer questions we've received from you, our viewers.